Oh, God, no, you're not let him in. Oh, bloody hell. Hello, darling. How you doing? All right.
Paul McCartney just did something that nobody in the music industry thought was possible. The man who spent 60 years avoiding every single controversy, who stayed diplomatically silent through decades of feuds and backstabbing, who's made a career out of being the nice Beatle, just absolutely obliterated Roger Waters with a statement so brutal that it left the entire rock world speechless. And this wasn't some off-the-cuff comment or misinterpreted quote. This was a calculated, devastating, perfectly timed nuclear strike that McCartney had clearly been planning for longer than anyone realizes. Because when Paul McCartney finally decides to destroy someone, he doesn't just throw punches, he drops atomic bombs. It started yesterday morning when McCartney's official social media accounts posted something that made everyone do a double take. No cute photos with Linda's memory. No nostalgic Beatles throwbacks, just a simple black background with white text that said, "Sometimes silence isn't golden, sometimes it's just cowardice. Today I choose truth over politeness." That should have been everyone's first warning that something massive was coming. Because Paul McCartney doesn't do cryptic social media posts. The man barely understands Instagram, and suddenly he's posting philosophical statements about choosing truth over politeness. That's when smart people started paying attention. 3 hours later, McCartney released a statement through his publicist that was so shocking, so completely out of character, that major news outlets thought it was fake at first. They actually called his management team to verify that Sir Paul McCartney had really written something this savage. Here's exactly what McCartney said, and I'm quoting directly. "I've watched Roger Waters attack a dead man's legacy while that man's family grieves, and I can no longer pretend this behavior deserves my diplomatic silence. Roger Waters represents everything that's toxic about artistic ego, and Ozzy Osbourne represented everything that's beautiful about rock and roll heart. Anyone who can't see the difference has never understood what music is really about." But that was just the warm-up. McCartney kept going, and every word was more devastating than the last. "I've spent decades staying quiet about Roger's character because I believed in taking the high road. But watching him kick a grieving family while they're down has shown me that sometimes the high road just enables bullies to keep bullying." Now, here's what makes this statement so absolutely shocking. Paul McCartney has never, and I mean never, personally attacked another musician in public. This is the man who stayed diplomatic when John Lennon was publicly trashing him in the press. He kept quiet when Yoko blamed him for breaking up the Beatles. He's been nothing but gracious to everyone from Elvis Costello to Kanye West, even when they've been difficult to work with. McCartney has built his entire public persona on being the peacemaker, the gentleman, the Beatle who never burns bridges. So for him to come out swinging at Roger Waters like this isn't just surprising. It's completely unprecedented, and it suggests something much deeper is going on here. Because the statement didn't stop there. McCartney made it personal in a way that shocked everyone who knows him. Roger Waters spent his career building walls between himself and human connection, then wonders why he's alone. Ozzy Osbourne spent his career tearing down walls between performers and audiences, and he died surrounded by love. That tells you everything you need to know about who these men really were. The music industry reaction was immediate and intense. Within hours, McCartney's statement was trending globally, with major artists either rallying to support him or scrambling to distance themselves from Waters. But what really sent shockwaves through the business was the realization that if Paul McCartney felt strongly enough to break his own golden rule about public feuds, then Roger Waters must have crossed a line that nobody fully understood yet. Here's the part that's got industry insiders completely baffled. McCartney's statement wasn't reactive. This wasn't Paul getting emotional and firing off an angry response to Waters' attack on Ozzy. The language was too precise, too calculated, too perfectly crafted to devastate Waters' reputation. This was strategic warfare from someone who's been thinking about this moment for a very long time. The most telling detail is the timing. McCartney waited until Waters' reputation was already damaged by Sharon Osbourne's counterattack, until Waters had already shown his worst side to the world, until the perfect moment to deliver a killing blow. This wasn't Paul defending a friend. This was Paul finally settling a score that goes much deeper than anyone realized. Because here's what nobody's talking about yet. Paul McCartney and Roger Waters have history. Serious, complicated, decades-old history that's been carefully hidden from public view. And McCartney's decision to finally break his silence about Waters suggests that this isn't really about defending Ozzy Osbourne at all. This is about something much bigger, much older, and much more personal than anyone in the music world ever suspected. The secret that Paul McCartney has been guarding for 50 years finally makes sense when you understand what really happened between the Beatles and Pink Floyd in 1973. And it wasn't some friendly rivalry between British bands or casual disagreement about musical direction. This was a full-scale betrayal that cut so deep, McCartney never got over it, and Roger Waters never even realized he'd made the biggest enemy of his career. It all started during the summer of 1973, when McCartney was struggling with the aftermath of the Beatles' breakup and desperately trying to prove that Wings could be more than just the band Paul McCartney formed after the Beatles. He'd been experimenting with darker, more conceptual material, moving away from the pop sensibilities that had made him famous. And that's when he made the mistake of trusting Roger Waters. Here's what nobody knows. McCartney and Waters actually collaborated in secret for 3 months in 1973. Not officially, not publicly, but in a series of private recording sessions that were supposed to result in a groundbreaking album that would change both their careers. McCartney brought his melodic genius, Waters brought his conceptual vision, and together they created something that should have been revolutionary. The project was McCartney's idea originally. He'd been fascinated by Pink Floyd's experimental approach and thought combining it with his songwriting skills could create the perfect fusion of accessibility and artistry. Waters was eager to work with a Beatle, seeing it as validation of his own creative importance. For those 3 months, they were actually friends, spending countless hours in London studios crafting what McCartney believed would be the most important music of his post-Beatles career. But here's where it gets ugly. The album they created together was never released under both their names. Because right before they were supposed to announce their collaboration to the world, Waters did something so backstabbing, so calculated, so absolutely devastating that it destroyed any possibility of friendship between them forever. Waters took the musical concepts they developed together, the arrangement ideas McCartney had contributed, even some of the lyrical themes they'd brainstormed, and used them as the foundation for Pink Floyd's next album without giving McCartney any credit whatsoever. Not just musical credit, but no acknowledgement that McCartney had been involved in the creative process at all. The betrayal was worse than simple plagiarism. Waters had convinced McCartney to share his most personal, experimental ideas, promising that their collaboration would revolutionize how the music industry thought about artistic partnerships. Then Waters turned around and used those ideas to make Pink Floyd look more innovative while making McCartney look like he was stuck in pop music mediocrity. What made this betrayal especially cruel was the timing. McCartney was at his most vulnerable creatively, trying to establish his identity beyond the Beatles, desperate to be taken seriously as an artist rather than just dismissed as the commercial Beatle. Waters knew exactly how much this collaboration meant to McCartney's artistic credibility, which is why stealing it was such a perfectly targeted attack. The industry rumors started almost immediately. Insiders began noticing similarities between McCartney's leaked demo sessions and Pink Floyd's new material, but Waters had been clever about covering his tracks. He'd taken McCartney's contributions and wrapped them in enough Pink Floyd's existing style that most people assumed any similarities were coincidental. But McCartney knew the truth, and it ate at him for decades. Every time Pink Floyd got praised for their innovative approach, McCartney knew he'd helped create some of those innovations. Every time Waters got credit for his artistic vision, McCartney remembered contributing to that vision and getting nothing in return except a masterclass in how cruel the music business could be. Here's the part that explains everything about McCartney's statement yesterday. For 50 years, McCartney has watched Waters build a reputation as this principled artist who cares more about artistic integrity than commercial success. But McCartney knows the truth, that Waters' entire artistic persona was built partly on stolen ideas from their secret collaboration, and that Waters has been taking credit for innovations that came from their partnership. The reason McCartney stayed silent for so long wasn't diplomacy. It was strategy. McCartney knew that if he ever spoke publicly about Waters' betrayal, he needed to do it at a moment when people would actually believe him, when Waters' character was already being questioned, when the timing would ensure maximum damage to Waters' reputation. Watching Waters attack Ozzy Osbourne's legacy gave McCartney that perfect moment. because Waters' behavior toward a dead man's memory was so similar to his behavior toward McCartney in 1973, taking someone else's work, claiming it as his own vision, and showing no remorse for the damage he caused in the process. McCartney's defense of Ozzy wasn't really about Ozzy at all. It was about finally getting revenge on the man who stole his ideas, betrayed his trust, and spent 50 years being celebrated for artistic integrity he never actually possessed. And now that McCartney has broken his silence, the music world is about to learn just how deep this rivalry really goes. 24 hours after McCartney's statement broke the internet, he did something that nobody saw coming. He didn't just make accusations about Roger Waters. He opened the Beatles' private archives and started releasing evidence that systematically destroys 50 years of Roger Waters' carefully constructed public image. And what he's revealed is so damning, so meticulously documented, that Waters' entire legacy is crumbling in real time. The first bomb McCartney dropped was a series of handwritten letters from Waters to McCartney between 1973 and 1975. Not just any letters, but desperate, pleading correspondence where Waters begs McCartney for advice on how to write more commercially viable songs. These aren't the confident, artistic integrity letters you'd expect from the man who claims he never compromised his vision for commercial success. In one letter dated September 1974, Waters literally asks McCartney to listen to rough Pink Floyd demos and help him make them more accessible to mainstream audiences. This is the same man who spent decades criticizing other artists for selling out, asking the ultimate pop Beatle for tips on commercial appeal. The contradiction is so stark it's almost unbelievable. But McCartney wasn't done. He released actual audio recordings from their secret 1973 collaboration sessions, and what these recordings reveal is absolutely devastating. You can hear Waters struggling with basic songwriting concepts that McCartney effortlessly demonstrates. There's one recording where Waters admits he doesn't understand how to write melodies that stick with listeners, and McCartney patiently walks him through techniques that Waters would later claim as his own innovations. The most damaging recording is from their final session together, where Waters promises McCartney that their collaboration will be announced as equal partnership, with both names credited for all the creative contributions. You can actually hear Waters saying, "Paul, this is revolutionary stuff. We're going to change how people think about artistic collaboration. Your name goes on everything, just like mine." That promise was broken 6 months later, when Waters released material clearly derived from their sessions, with no mention of McCartney's involvement whatsoever. McCartney then released something that sent shockwaves through the music journalism community. Private interviews Waters gave to British music magazines in the mid-70s, where he systematically trashed the Beatles while using concepts he'd learned directly from McCartney during their collaboration. In one interview, Waters calls the Beatles commercially minded mediocrity, while describing artistic approaches he'd literally learned from McCartney months earlier. The hypocrisy is staggering, but it gets worse. McCartney's archive dump included internal Pink Floyd correspondence where Waters discusses borrowing arrangement ideas from that Beatles session without crediting the source. These documents prove that Waters knew exactly what he was doing when he stole McCartney's contributions, and that he deliberately covered it up to protect his reputation as an uncompromising artistic visionary. But here's the evidence that's causing the biggest scandal in the music industry. McCartney released recordings of a private dinner party from 1976, where Waters, apparently drunk, boasts to other musicians about how he outsmarted McCartney during their collaboration. You can actually hear Waters laughing about how he got free songwriting lessons from a Beatle and used them to make Pink Floyd more successful while keeping McCartney from getting any credit. The most shocking revelation came when McCartney released witness statements from sound engineers and session musicians who were present during their 1973 collaboration. These testimonies, signed and notarized decades ago but never released, detail exactly how much creative input McCartney provided to what became core elements of Pink Floyd's later sound. One engineer's statement describes watching McCartney teach Waters specific bass techniques that Waters would later use on Pink Floyd albums without ever acknowledging where he learned them. Another session musician details how McCartney developed harmonic concepts during their collaboration that Waters incorporated into Pink Floyd songs years later, taking full credit for innovations that originated in their secret sessions. McCartney saved the most devastating evidence for last. Financial documents showing that Waters actually tried to get McCartney to invest in Pink Floyd's future albums, promising him uncredited creative input in exchange for financial backing. When McCartney refused, Waters apparently decided to take the creative input anyway, without providing the financial partnership they discussed. The cumulative effect of McCartney's evidence dump is the complete destruction of Roger Waters' credibility as an artist of integrity. Every claim Waters has ever made about artistic purity, every criticism he's leveled at commercially minded musicians, every lecture he's given about maintaining creative independence, all of it is exposed as hypocrisy from a man who built his reputation on stolen ideas and broken promises. This isn't just about settling an old score anymore. McCartney has methodically proven that Roger Waters' entire public persona is a lie, and the music world is scrambling to process what this means for Pink Floyd's legacy. McCartney's evidence dump didn't just expose Roger Waters as a fraud. It triggered the biggest industry realignment in decades, with major artists, record labels, and corporate sponsors scrambling to distance themselves from Waters while publicly aligning with McCartney. And the speed of this industry earthquake is unprecedented, because nobody wants to be on the wrong side of a Beatle with this much documented evidence. Within hours of McCartney's archive release, David Gilmour issued a statement that sent shockwaves through Pink Floyd's remaining fan base. Gilmour didn't just support McCartney's revelations, he added his own bombshell. "I've known about Roger's behavior toward Paul for decades, and I'm ashamed I stayed silent. Paul McCartney deserves recognition for contributions to our sound that Roger deliberately hid from the world." That statement from Gilmour was the moment everyone realized this wasn't just about old grudges anymore. This was about the complete rewriting of rock history. Pink Floyd's own guitarist was confirming that their legendary sound was built partly on stolen Beatles innovations, and that Waters had been lying about it for 50 years. The corporate response was immediate and brutal. Waters' current tour sponsors started pulling out faster than anyone thought possible. 3 major brands canceled their deals within 12 hours, citing concerns about association with deceptive business practices. The speed of these cancellations suggests that corporate lawyers had been preparing for this moment, probably since McCartney's first statement made it clear something big was coming. But the real industry earthquake started when other legendary artists began reaching out to McCartney's team with their own Roger Waters horror stories. Apparently, McCartney's courage in finally speaking out gave other musicians permission to share decades of suppressed experiences with Waters' toxic behavior. The most damaging revelation came from Keith Richards, who disclosed that Waters had approached the Rolling Stones in 1978 claiming he developed revolutionary recording techniques in collaboration with Paul McCartney. Richards now realizes that Waters was trying to sell them stolen McCartney innovations as his own original concepts. Roger was shopping Paul's ideas around London like he'd invented them himself, Richards said. "We should have called Paul directly instead of trusting Roger's version of events." Eric Clapton's camp leaked even more devastating details. Apparently, Waters had spent years telling other musicians that McCartney was creatively exhausted after the Beatles and had become dependent on collaborators for fresh ideas. Waters was literally using his secret sessions with McCartney as evidence that McCartney couldn't write innovative music anymore, while simultaneously stealing the innovations McCartney had shared with him. The record industry response has been swift and decisive. Warner Music, Universal, and Sony have all issued statements supporting transparent artistic collaboration and honest crediting practices. While they don't mention Waters by name, industry insiders understand this as a complete rejection of Waters' business practices and a show of support for McCartney's position. But here's the part that nobody saw coming. McCartney's nuclear attack on Waters wasn't just about revenge or setting the record straight. It was perfectly timed to coincide with McCartney's own major announcement that changes everything about how we understand the Beatles' creative legacy. Sources close to McCartney's team are suggesting that this entire Waters exposé was preparation for something much bigger. McCartney is reportedly planning to release previously unreleased Beatles material that will revolutionize how people understand the band's creative process. But he needed to establish his credibility as someone who fights back against artistic theft before releasing material that could be vulnerable to future plagiarism. The Waters scandal has essentially created a protective shield around McCartney's upcoming releases. After watching What Happened to Waters When Someone Stole from McCartney, no artist would dare attempt to plagiarize or claim credit for unreleased Beatles innovations. The most shocking industry rumor is that McCartney's team has been documenting suspected plagiarism cases for decades, building files on artists who may have borrowed Beatles concepts without proper credit. The Waters exposé might just be the beginning of a much larger campaign to protect the Beatles' intellectual property and ensure proper historical credit for their innovations. Music executives are quietly warning their artists to review any material that might have been influenced by Beatles concepts. Because if McCartney is willing to destroy Roger Waters after 50 years, nobody is safe from accountability for creative theft. The Roger Waters scandal has essentially transformed McCartney from the diplomatic Beatle into the most feared man in the music industry. And if the rumors about his upcoming announcements are true, this is just the beginning of Paul McCartney's campaign to rewrite rock history on his own terms. This story is developing by the hour as more artists come forward with their own Roger Waters experiences. Subscribe and ring that notification bell because we're getting exclusive updates on McCartney's next moves and which other classic rock legends might be in his crosshairs. Comment below. Do you think McCartney was right to wait 50 years for the perfect revenge, or should he have exposed Waters decades ago?